What's up, RotoBallers? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jorden Hill, and with a wild Week 6 in the books, you might take a look at your fantasy roster and start to panic about a few underperforming players. We're going to take a look at some of the more disappointing guys this season and talk about whether or not we need to bench them or maybe even drop them before heading into Week 7. I don't typically talk about quarterbacks in these videos, but since fantasy QBs were drafted higher than ever this past offseason, let's discuss one that hasn't lived up to his draft day cost in Trevor Lawrence. As someone who drafted a lot of Trevor Lawrence this summer, I was a firm believer that he would take the next step into fantasy superstardom. He just hasn't done that through 6 games. He currently ranks outside of the top 12 fantasy QBs and doesn't have a single showing with more than 2 total touchdowns. On top of that, Lawrence is now dealing with a knee injury and is in danger of missing Week 7. I would prefer to hang on to Lawrence in all formats. I still think he has a lot of upside and a lot of weapons at his disposal, and he really hasn't been terrible from a fantasy perspective. Now, if you're in a really shallow single quarterback league, maybe you don't have an IR spot to throw him on if he does get rolled out, I can understand if you have to drop him, but I really would try to hang on. Now taking a look at some running backs, we'll start with Damen Pierce. He's finished outside of the top 24 fantasy running backs in 4 of 6 games. He hasn't been utilized as a pass catcher out of the backfield, and things got really ugly in Week 6 when he was both outsnapped and outproduced by Devin Singletary. I do have my concerns about Pierce, but it is important to note that he had a really tough matchup this past week against the Saints, who have been one of the best run defenses in the league all season. You can't drop Pierce because of the running back landscape right now, and the good news is that the Texans get a Week 7 bye and then come back to face the Carolina Panthers, who have been dreadful against the run this season. I think you can start Pierce as a low-end RB2 or flex in that matchup, and if he still doesn't come through for fantasy, you can probably consider benching him after that. Next, let's talk about Rashad White. White has been really inefficient this season, and he was given just 7 carries this week, and even Keyshawn Vaughn got 6. Now, the good news is that Vaughn looked even worse with his touches. White still got most of the targets out of the backfield and played on a lot of snaps, but if he continues to underperform like this, it might be sooner rather than later that the Bucs try to see what they have in rookie Sean Tucker. I would be actively trying to bench White in Week 7, as Tampa Bay will face the Atlanta Falcons, who've surrendered the 5th fewest fantasy points to running backs this year. Moving over to wide receivers, it really pains me to bring up Davante Adams here. Adams has been one of the most consistent receivers in the game over the course of his career, but he has just 1 performance inside the top 12 fantasy wideouts so far this season, and he hasn't seen more than 5 targets in either of the past 2 games, as Jacoby Myers has displayed more chemistry with Jimmy Garoppolo. To make matters even worse, Garoppolo is now dealing with a back injury and might not even play in Week 7. We don't know if the Raiders would choose to go with Aiden O'Connell or Brian Hoyer as their starting quarterback, but either way, it's not good news for Adams. Still, I don't think I would have it in me to bench him, especially against the Chicago Bears. In fact, Adams' schedule over the next 3 weeks looks pretty good, so you probably need to just keep rolling with him and maybe hope he gets traded before the deadline. Another wideout that was Mr. Consistency for fantasy for a long time is DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins actually had a really big Week 5. It was by far his best game as a Titan, but he followed it up with just 1 catch for 20 yards on 5 targets in Week 6. Tennessee will head into a bye in Week 7, which is probably good news for Hopkins, as Ryan Tannehill also got injured this past week. Hopefully he'll have a shot to play in Week 8, but Tannehill has been awful this season, so I'm not even sure how much it matters. I would hang on to Hopkins, wait for another big game and try to trade him off of that, but until then, he's just a risky flex option at best. Finally, we have Jahan Dotson, who hasn't even hit 50 receiving yards in a game this season, and he was a total goose egg in Week 6 on just 1 target. Dotson's a talented player, and maybe he gets it going at some point in his second season, but he's been consistently outperformed by Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel, so I think it's safe to move on from him in all redraft leagues. Hope you guys enjoyed. Leave a comment down below with the players that have you panicking 6 weeks into the NFL season. Also, please remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe to RotoBaller for more awesome fantasy football content that'll help you win big in 2023. Thank you for tuning in, and best of luck in Week 7.